Hi and welcome to Lecture 12. In this lecture we'll discuss modules. Modules as namespaces, modules as mixins. We'll talk about built-in Ruby modules, and we'll also talk about the concept of a require relative. So on the basic level, module really is just a container. It's a container for classes, methods, or other modules even. It's like a class, but it cannot be instantiated. So you cannot have an object of a specific module like you could have an object, obviously, of a class. And modules are really used for two main purposes. One, they're used as a namespace, or they're used as a mixin. So to understand the idea of module as a namespace, a lot of languages, for example Java, will have this idea of a package structure. So you don't have a name collision between classes. You'll have, for example, org dot package 1 dot package 2 and then the class at the end. Ruby doesn't like having very deep structure, but it is obviously nice to have a way that the class names shouldn't collide, so you shouldn't have a collision. So that's the idea of a namespace. So for example, you could have a match class, which makes sense to be part of a sports module, and you could have a match class that's part of a patterns module. And these are completely separate, but the way you instantiate them is instead of just saying match.new, because then you wouldn't know which match it is, you put them inside a module, and then you say, for example, module name sports, : match.new, which refers to this class, and patterns, : which refers to this class. Another way to use modules is as mixins. This is really cool. So in OO you have a concept called interfaces. A lot of languages, for example Java, will have a concept of an interface, which basically just means a contract. A certain certain group of classes, they abide by a certain contract which defines what a class could do. Mixins go a step beyond that. They actually provide a way to share code, to share a mixin, which is why they're called mixins, to share code between multiple classes. Not only that, you could even include built-in modules like enumerable that do the hard work for you, as we're going to see in a minute. So to see a simple example of a module as a mixin, for example, you have a module that's called say my name, which defines a accessor, which is a setter and a getter, and just basically defines a method that says print name, which prints that name. And then you could have a person class or a company class that both include the module say my name, which basically lets you include the functionality inside that module. So now you could have a person, you could create a person, and then you could set the person name. Wait a second, but the person doesn't have a name method. That's okay, because a module does. So you include the functionality of a module inside the person class. Same thing of a company. You include this functionality in a company. So where it gets really interesting is that you could include built-in modules from a Ruby itself. So when we discussed arrays, I mentioned that arrays have methods like map, select, reject, detect, and so on. So actually the arrays themselves don't really have those methods. The array class includes the enumerable module, and that's what gives it all that functionality. And you can include this in your own class, and all you have to do in this case for the enumerable module is to provide implementation for one method, which is the each method. And once you do that, all the other functionality like map, select, and other methods become available to you. So let's see an example of this, where you would use this. For example, let's say you have a team, and you have players on the team, and you want to write a Ruby program that maybe selects a roster for some event. Okay, so you would have a file called player.rb, which maybe would have a class player. Now, you could define multiple classes in the same file. Ruby doesn't have anything against that, But sometimes you might want to define it as in separate files. That's okay as well. And we'll see in a minute how to combine, how to bring all those classes back into one place. So you have a class player that maybe will have a name, age, and a skill level getters, and that will have a constructor that will initialize the player with a name, age, and a skill level. Okay? And then you could have a toS method, which is basically your toString method, which just says what this player is. In this case, it's the name, skill level, SL skill level, and age for age. And then, maybe in a different file somewhere, you'll have a team class. And the team class will include the enumerable module, which, as we're going to see in a minute, gives you lots of functionality. And all you have to do in order to be able to use this functionality is define one method, which is each. So the way you define this each method is you say players.each, loop through each element in the players array, and yield the player to a block. Going back to the constructor, a team will just have a name, maybe a red team, a blue team. It will also have a setter and a getter for name and players. So player starts out as just being an empty array. You could also add players using the splat functionality we discussed before. And basically all you're doing is you're just adding the array of players that are passed in to your existing players, which starts out as nothing. And then the toS just prints some information about the team. So maybe in the third place, you'll have a regular file, a regular.rb file, and you could require relative the player file and the team file. And require relative just basically means relative to this file, where are those files? So if a directory, in different directory, you could use a path before the player here. So in this case, they are all in the same directory, so you just say require the player, which is relative to this file in the same directory, require team, so that brings in the team class as well. And we're going to create a bunch of players. So we're going to create Bob, Mike, Scott, and so on. And then we're going to create a team, let's say a red team, and we're going to call the add players, which, as you remember, has a splat, which basically lets you pass in all those players. So now you have a red team with a whole bunch of players. But now comes the cool part. Because red team includes the enumerable module, you could all of a sudden start doing interesting things with your team. You could select all the players with an age range between 14 and 20, inclusive because there are two dots. And you could reject any player whose skill level is less than 4.5, and boom, you got your final result, which are the eligible players on the team. This is really powerful. We haven't really written any code. I mean, the team class is really small. But because we import the enumerable module, we get lots of functionality. In summary, modules allow you to mix in useful code into other classes. This could be Ruby modules, or this could be your own modules that maybe you want to share. And require relative is a useful way of including other Ruby files relative to the current Ruby file. So this way you don't have to put all 20 classes, let's say, that you're dealing with in the same file. You could, but at a certain point, you have a freedom to say, that's too much code in one file, I want to go to a different file. There's no restriction from a language point of view of how many classes you could have in the same file, but certainly at a certain point, you might want to think about splitting those files up. Next, we'll talk about scope.